The Clipse are officially back. That's right, Pusha T and Malice are going to be dropping a new record this year. And this is something that myself, a lot of other people in the music industry, we'd been hearing about. We'd been told this was coming, but of course, had to keep my mouth shut until it was official. And now the news is out, and everyone is really excited for this new project from the Clipse. But like everything in hip hop, there is some controversy, and it involves Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and Universal Music Group. I'm going to break down what the Clipse are saying, what their management is saying, and why it might have cost them seven figures just to get out of a deal because of censorship and Drake. So there's a lot to talk about, so let's unpack it. So this is what everyone in the hip hop industry, people are debating this. This is what the group chats are talking about right now. Like, why did the Clipse leave Def Jam? So as a backstory, before we get into it, the Clipse and Pusha T as a solo artist are signed to Def Jam. I would say right now they're probably like one of the most, if not the most prominent hip hop names on the label at the moment. So it's a big deal for the Clipse to be releasing a record this year and for it to be dropping on Def Jam, which is a historical hip hop label. But the Clipse aren't really feeling their label, or let me say actually their former label. And this article explains what happened. So the Clipse covered GQ, and I'm going to actually link the article in the description. It's a great interview. And by the way, shout outs to the Clipse for giving a good interview. So many rap interviews now. I just feel it's like one line, or you can tell that the artist didn't want to be there. So it's always dope when an artist actually, talks in an interview. So this is the GQ interview. It was done by Fraser Tharp, and he's a staff writer over there. So let's scroll down. I mean, you should read the full interview. It's really entertaining. But this is the part that's the super controversial part. So it says that, Pusha felt confident, proud, and assured of themselves when they presented their music to Def Jam. So this is like the music on the album. They said the label loved what they heard, except for Kendrick Lamar's guest verse on the thunderous Chains and Whips. So the final version of this song, Pharrell actually teased it at a Louis Vuitton runway show. And Pusha said that it was one of the first songs that they recorded. Now, according to the Clipse, Universal Music Group, and this is the parent company of Def Jam, they heard Kendrick's verse and they thought it was a shot at Drake. So immediately they're like, we're not feeling this. You got to censor this. You got to take it off. You've got to do something. And this is what Pusha says. He calls their apprehension, quote, stupid, because none of the bars in Kendrick's verse could really be perceived as a shot or even a subliminal. And if you've seen this quote running around social media, it comes from that verse. Therapy taught me how to open up. It also showed me I don't give a fuck. It's a great line. And I actually did tweet it. So it's a little, shout outs to that lyric. And this paragraph is the heart of it all. Pusha can barely contain his disgust, recounting how the stalemate with Def Jam played out. Quote, they wanted me to ask Kendrick to censor his verse, which of course I was never doing, he explains, and then they wanted me to take the record off. And so after a month of not doing it, Steve Gowley, the lawyer over there, was like, we'll just drop the Clipse, but that can't work because I'm still there solo. But if you let us all go... And so began the Clipse and Pusha T leaving Def Jam. Wow. So they ended up going over to Roc Nation, which is obviously Jay-Z's company. And this is what Pusha says. I think there's a synergy just in a rap sense, and it's going to speak volumes. And he said that of the partnership with Roc Nation. So before I dissect this, everything that we're hearing about this situation is coming from the Clipse and their management team. Billboard actually reached out to both Def Jam and Universal Music Group, and they did not get a response. So just keep in mind that we're getting one side of this story. But I really don't think that the Clipse or their manager would make this up, because to leave a label, especially so close to dropping an album, like leaving a major to go to a Roc Nation, which I think most likely is probably a distribution deal, it's really telling, and it shows that there must have been a reason to do that. But again, the caveat is we are getting one side of this story. I have to say overall, artistically, it's not a good look. We really have to give artists that right to say what they want to say. Of course, within reason. I mean, the First Amendment does have its its considerations, but these are artists, and the whole idea about music, hip hop, rock and roll, whatever it is, artists have to be artists and they need to have that creative expression, that autonomy, that freedom. And if we are to believe that a label is going in and discerning lyrics where there doesn't even seem to be a direct shot and they're asking for verses to be taken off, they're asking for artists to be censored, their own artists, because remember, Kendrick his deal is through Interscope, which is also distributed through Universal Music Group. So for this to happen, it just isn't a great look. Now, I do understand that in Universal's mind, they're currently in litigation with Drake. Drake is suing them for defamation because he feels that Not Like Us had a lot of detrimental effects to him and his safety. And I've done whole videos just breaking down Drake's lawsuit. But again, it's setting such a bad precedent. And this is something I said from jump. Like, Drake's lawsuit is very self-serving. Like, it serves him. It isn't meant to serve all artists or protect all artists, because I don't think he would care if anything wasn't related to him, right? All of these conversations seem to be around him and his feelings. So I think we're just going down a very slippery slope where labels are actively getting involved in the lyrical content. And I think if they want to get involved, then they have to get involved across the board. And if a label is going to get involved in the creative process, where does that stop? You know, it starts with the lyrical content. Is it going to be the visuals, who that artist is friends with? Like, all of these things. Is the label going to get more heavy-handed because they are worried about litigation, whether it be from Drake or other artists? And I think that's where this Drake lawsuit, it just sets that tone that now when an artist isn't happy because they lost a rap beef, they're pointing the finger at everyone and trying to blame everybody. And when you go to court, like, it costs a lot of money. So I can see labels just being more and more apprehensive about signing so-called controversial artists, working with them. And I just don't know from a artistic standpoint how that ends up being beneficial for anybody. Now, after that GQ interview, Steven Victor, who's Pusha as well as the Clipse' manager, he did an interview with Billboard and he gave more insights from his perspective. And this is very interesting. So here's the headline. Steven Victor on the insane amount of money it took for Pusha T, Clipse to exit Def Jam. So Billboard asks, when you started to hear objections to the Lamar verse on the Clipse album, where were they coming from? And Steven says, UMG has this department where they review lyrics. So it was that department. The real reason that department is there is to protect the artist and the label from lawsuits for copyright infringement. They do it for all the labels. Some labels adhere to it closer than others. Let's say you interpolate somebody else's song. That department is there to make sure that the song is properly cleared. It's not meant to be like, you said XYZ about XYZ artists, so we're not going to release this music. And this is actually a beneficial service to artists because oftentimes you're, in that creative spirit, you put out a record and you don't realize that some lyrics you may have taken, they might actually belong to someone else. And a very famous case, which actually involves Def Jam, is with Cisco and the Thong Song. So when he said Living La Vida Loca, he interpolated Ricky Martin. And the problem is they didn't clear it. So after the record comes out, it's a super big hit for Cisco and Def Jam. Ricky Martin and the original songwriter came around and said, you never cleared this. So when they had to sort of do the splits on the record, Ricky and the original songwriter actually got paid, from what I've gathered, more than Cisco and the original songwriters and producers. So artists, you got to clear everything. So in that way, this department, if it does what it's supposed to do, it's actually a great service to artists. Now, what it's not there to do is to tell somebody that a Kendrick Lamar verse might hurt Drake's feelings. Like, that's not the same thing. So Billboard continues, while you've been working with Pusha, have you ever had challenges with that department before? Now, pay attention to this. He said, in the beginning, no, but starting in 2018, yeah. What happened in 2018? That would be the Song of Adidon. And if you know, that song is not available on streaming, it's only available on SoundCloud, like it's never actually been officially released. And it looks like there were some internal objections to that. So Steven says that we just wanted to avoid all that. We never properly cleared the record, so that's why it's still on SoundCloud. There's also 2 other records that Pusha has mentioned that Universal had issues with. One was Rick Ross's Maybach Music 6 and Pop Smoke's Paranoia. And that's just something that Steven also agrees that, yup, same thing. UMG thought that we were dissing Drake on the Pop Smoke record, and then he says he wasn't, but they thought we were. And also Pop Smoke was part of Steven's label, and obviously he managed Pusha, so they came to Steven. They said, we're not going to put this out now unless you get Pusha to change these lyrics. Either he changes these lyrics or we're not putting the album out. Steven says, what happened to freedom of speech? First of all, he's not dissing Drake, but how do you get to tell him to just change his lyrics or you're not putting this album out? It's like holding this album hostage, and I do wonder, this could actually bode well for Universal because part of Drake's lawsuit, he feels that Universal ganged up on him when it came to Not Like Us, and they unfairly pushed Kendrick's record over his records. But if this is true, like this is actually evidence for Universal to say, no, going back to, several years ago, we've actually been protecting you. Maybe you didn't know about it, but we've actively been telling artists not to diss you. So Universal, like legal, if you're watching this could be like Exhibit A in court. So finally, Def Jam tells the Clipse, all right, well, you guys can go. But you can't just leave a contract because, advances have been paid. There's a lot of red tape behind the scenes. So it actually costs the Clipse and Pusha money to get out of their deal. And according to Steven Victor, it was 7 figures. So this is what he says. So they, Def Jam, said, find another deal and let's figure out a business. They didn't drop us. They were like, pay us this money, which was an exorbitant amount of money, a shit ton of money, and we'll let you out the deal. That's what happened. We paid them the money, an insane amount of money. It wasn't like $200,000. It was a lot of money for an artist to come up with. They bought themselves out of the deal. So the Clipse paid 7 figures, reportedly, and that's how they were able to walk away from Def Jam. And if you want to know why this number was so high, Steven says that Pusha had like 3 albums left on his deal. So I'm sure he got like a big advance to sign. I know he's put out a couple albums, so maybe overall he signed maybe like a 7-album deal or something like that. And he's still at 3 albums. So Def Jam's like, you owe us this amount of money. And then the Clipse had their deal. So 7 figures. And that's what it was, just to have their creative freedom and creative expression. And not only did Def Jam get that big payday, but they're also getting some part of the profits of the new Clipse album. And this is just the business. This is the music industry. So this is what it was. And it looks like Steven got on the phone with Jay-Z and he said, look, this is what's happening. We've been talking about doing X, Y, and Z together. There's an opportunity. And then he hit me right away. He said, you just made my day. Let's figure it out. What do we need to get it done? I wish more people were like that in the music business or all business, like be more like Hov. Like, let's just get this done. So they just went back and forth. Oh, and this is interesting. So according to Steven, the Clipse now own their masters. So this is a distribution deal through Roc Nation. And he said we worked out the deal in less than 24 hours. So good for them. I think it's a win for Clipse, for Pusha, for Jay-Z. I think this is going to be such a great look for Roc Nation because to have a Clipse record, I mean, this is like an event record in hip hop. I think is such a great look for them. And also just the optics, right? From what we see, Def Jam, which is supposed to stand for hip hop, it's supposed to stand for like real rap. They're letting, some of their best artists go because of censorship. Like this is so anti-hip hop. So the way the narrative is, well, Jay-Z and Roc Nation, they're artist friendly. And if your label, if your major deal isn't treating you right, come to Roc Nation. So I think it's a good look for them for sure. Def Jam, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if they're going to make like a statement around this, but I just think the optics of this as a hip hop fan or just as an industry, it doesn't look great when a label is sort of getting involved in an artistic beef or, rap wars. Like, that's just so not what hip hop is about. There have been instances where labels, even like a Def Jam or other rap labels, have intervened when, it might be an A&R or producer or an executive is like, hey, you know what, we need to sort of, mitigate things. Let's not take things to the next level. And that makes a lot of sense, especially when you're talking about people's lives or violence. Like, no one wants things to escalate, but anyone who would look at like Pusha versus Drake or Kendrick versus Drake through that lens, I just feel like you missed the headline and you have no idea what you're talking about. But I think we're just in this era of lawsuits and, litigiousness, and it's coming from the artists, right, of all places. So I just feel like the future for labels, they're going to be more and more careful. They're going to start scrutinizing every little thing. And I just don't know how that benefits artists or hip hop. But I would love to know what you think about all this. What do you think about Pusha T and the Clipse pushing back against Def Jam, leaving their deal, having to pay 7 figures for their freedom and going over to Roc Nation? How do you think this affects Def Jam's reputation? Is it still this, home for hip hop? Does it represent rap excellence to you? Or do you feel like, these stories coming out, the Drake lawsuit, the way Universal is handling it, allegedly, reportedly, does that just kind of leave you, feeling some kind of way? I would love to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments.